Just a real quick survey of the room. How many of you guys are developers in the room? How about deployed in your small business or your enterprise? Okay. Anybody have no idea why they're here? How you got here? That's good. All right. Before I get started, just a real quick reminder, you have surveys on your tables, and I think there are surveys at the back. Please fill those out for the sessions both today and tomorrow. That definitely helps Digium and the AstraCon committee to figure out what to bring back next year and what didn't work out so well. So a real brief overview of myself to get started. My name is Dennis Little. I'm the founder of ReliAvail IT company. It's a brand new company, was just formed in June, and I'm here to talk to you about disaster recovery and some of the advantages that Asterisk has in this forum. Really, my goal today is to share some of my experiences and some of the hard knocks that I've had and some of the hard lessons that I've learned to provoke thought and to get feedback from everybody in this room. So if you have ideas or you see things that look interesting or you'd like to share with others as I go throughout the presentation, I would definitely encourage you to do that. I think that's what AstraCon is all about, is getting this great community of people together and learning from each other. We're all doing the same sorts of things in different ways and learning how to do it better all the time. So today I want to look at some business and engineering questions that we should be looking at when it comes to disaster recovery and business continuity. How VoIP beats traditional telecom. We're going to look at some disaster-tested solutions, so some things that actually work in the real world that we've put into production, and then some examples and tips and tricks along the way as we go. So it's probably important to understand why I believe in Asterisk. And this really came out of working with a large social services organization. This organization supports about 5,300 people on their Avaya systems over 12 sites in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. And they serve about 70,000 families and children per year through those phone systems as well. And I was working on a project I guess about 2005 for them, and it was a highly available voicemail system for all of these people. And I started looking under the hood, and it was all a lot of free and open source software. It was running on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, MySQL, of course SIP with some Avaya extension of SIP on top of it. And that really started me out looking to see if there was a free and open source PBX out there. And I found Asterisk. Does anybody remember the TI-99? They may have one of these. I was really fascinated by this machine because it had tapes and this little cassette player you'd plug into it, and you would play your program, and you could, to copy the program, you just copy the cassette tape. And at a young age, this really fascinated me because I could unplug the cassette recorder and I could actually listen to the program play. And that kind of plays into telephony a little bit as well, what fascinates me about it. I had an opportunity back in April. Avaya was doing what they call their Evolutions Tour and traveling around the United States and bringing in their Avaya partners and whatnot. And I was interested in going because my client runs a lot of Avaya systems along with Astra systems. And then I saw that Steve Wozniak was talking, and I said, I gotta go to New York City. But I said to my buddy Rick, the guy that works for this company, I said, I'm gonna wear my Astra shirt when I go. So I wanted to share this, this photo with you. I thought you guys would find this humorous. And this actually started a lot of very interesting conversations at the show. So there were probably 20 or 30 vendor partners there that have invested a lot of money into being partners with Avaya. Their main business line is Avaya. And I was interested in learning about their solutions, and I would go up and talk to them and find out how it integrated with Avaya switches and whatnot. And then I would point at my little AstraCon logo and I'd say, well, what about Asterisk? Does it work with Asterisk? And they would say, yeah, but come behind a booth because we can't talk about that on the show floor. And that was really cool for me because I think that's the evolution, right? We're taking things away from the giant telecom industry, and we're giving it back to the consumer. Steve Wozniak was asked, he had a little one-on-one sit-down interview during the show, And he was asked, what are some of the biggest barriers to innovation today? Now, it's important to understand that Steve Wozniak used to be a public school teacher. He taught school for 5 or 6 years before he went to Hewlett-Packard and started designing calculators. And he was asked this question, what are some of the biggest barriers to innovation today? And without hesitation, he answered, our education system. Our education system is stifling innovation, and it rewards people for thinking inside the box, thinking like everybody else. And I thought that that was a really, really powerful answer, especially from somebody that came from inside the system. So Steve Wozniak designed, of course, everybody knows the Apple I, and he designed it because he really wanted a computer system that could hook up to his TV set that he had at his house, and monitors back then were $8,000 or $10,000, and or he had a printer, or he had LEDs, and it wasn't very user-friendly. So he designed the Apple I that he could connect it to his TV set and have a monitor, right? And he took it to Hewlett-Packard, and he said, you guys have been so good to me. You've given me an education. I believe that Hewlett-Packard could take this PC concept, and we could change the world with it. And Hewlett-Packard turned him down. They said, that's a dumb idea. We don't think it's going to go anywhere. And they turned him down not once, not twice, but 5 times. And I bring this up because I think this goes into innovation and disaster recovery and business continuity and all of the tricks and new things that Asterisk is introducing to this market. We know that Asterisk and VoIP are innovative. We've turned things upside down on its head in the industry. And we know that Asterisk is extremely disruptive to the industry as well. So what does it mean to be disruptive? It means to break something, to rupture, throw into disorder. And while Asterisk and VoIP are very disruptive on one hand, they help us mitigate risk and actually fix things and keep things from breaking on the other. So it's a very interesting dichotomy if you look at the kind of landscape of things. I hope that Ole doesn't mind me stealing from his talk earlier today, but I sat in on his talk, and I felt that it was important to put his points and his challenges into my talk this afternoon, because a lot of what he's advocating and what he's challenging us as a community to do fit right into disaster recovery and business continuity. So if you weren't in Ole's talk this morning, he issued a challenge with 4 points. One is to encrypt everything, to make the cost of listening in as high as possible. If we as a community have systems deployed at large that are encrypted by default, we make the target much, much bigger and much more difficult and much more expensive for people to be listening on our phone calls. He advocates integrating IPv6 everywhere. That's an entirely different discussion and one that could get very in-depth, but one that, again, links back to business continuity and using the last point, federation, so using domain names instead of IP addresses, making your systems much more portable than they are today. So if something breaks in site A, you can more easily fail it over to site B with a simple change without having to go in and change 100 configurations that have an IP address hard-coded somewhere. Or maybe it's just built right into your DNS that when that system fails, it knows to automatically go somewhere else. So I wanted to share that challenge with you. Definitely go and watch his talk when the videos come out. I think that there are some very, very important points that he made in that talk. And let's help each other. Like I said, let's start a dialogue and figure out how we can solve these problems. So in the past decade plus of telephony, we definitely have a history of paying far too much for the services that we're getting. We now have an economy which is driving innovation towards efficiency and cost savings. The economy is not what it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. We have a landscape which is much more distributed. Companies are recognizing that people like to work from home. People are productive when they work from home. They may not be able to get the employees that they want in their city or state where they're located, and they need to be geographically distributed. So this all leads into problems with disaster recovery. And we need innovative solutions to make sure that our businesses are not, we don't have single points of failure, and our telecommunications are still up and running in the event of a disaster. So one challenge that I would issue to you is around your disaster recovery plan. One, is it documented? If it's not documented, it doesn't exist, right? If we get hit by the bus, we need somebody to be able to read that disaster recovery plan and put it into play. Secondly, is it practiced? So have you actually practiced your disaster recovery plan and figured out where the holes are? We always have holes. We always have things that we run into that we didn't think about the first time around. And then is it a living document? So are you learning from your practice and the new hack attempts that are out and the types of attack that your organization might come under? And I think if you answered no anywhere in this list, and we probably all do, I think everybody's guilty of this, we all have work left to do when it comes to disaster recovery planning. Is everybody monitoring and alerting today on their systems? So we have a mix. I think an important point here is we talk about disasters and we talk about avoiding disasters, but has a disaster already happened and you don't even know about it yet? That's an important question to ask. So, reliability and availability are certainly things that we want to worry about. So can the customer make a phone call, whether our customer is internal or external? Can they do that all the time? But something that we don't always think about in terms of disaster is fraud, outages. We need to be able to tell on our systems if somebody's processing. The guys from Greenfield Tech have an example of a client that in 2 days had $400,000 of toll fraud on their system. If somebody wasn't monitoring that system further up the pipeline and had raised the flag, they never would have known about that. I would certainly count that to be a disaster. If you are not monitoring and alerting and trending today, these are some tools that I would definitely encourage you to look at. Most of these are well-established tools. They're well-supported in the community. They're mostly free. Nagios is a very, very good, simple system to be able to alert you that your website homepage has changed. So maybe somebody hacked your website and put up something on the site. Everybody remember Hacked by Chinese way back? It can alert you to things like that. It can alert you to, hey, I'm going to run out of hard disk, or I'm using up all my memory all the time. Trending, I think, is a little bit different than alerting, and trending is keeping track of historical data and visualizing it so that we can look at it at a glance and understand what's going on in the system. It's one thing to generate tons and tons of logs and error messages, but humans are visual beings. We have very bad memories. So we may not remember that this system sits idle at 20%, but now with a graph, we can see that it's now at 200% of its normal usage, and maybe there's something going on there that shouldn't be. So I think it definitely brings out your ability to identify weaknesses. So to recognize, mitigate, document, and then follow those weaknesses. Until recently, right before I founded ReliAvail, I worked for a Department of Defense contractor. And in the defense world, it is not so much about making sure that your systems are 100% impenetrable, because that doesn't exist, okay? New vulnerabilities come out, new ways of hacking systems come out. What is important is that we recognize what the weaknesses are. We document those so that if we do get hit by the bus or we leave and we go somewhere else, someone else can understand those. And then we describe how we're mitigating, and we continue to follow those vulnerabilities. So maybe some vulnerability that we recognize in the system today that might affect our reliability or our availability further down the road, there's no fix for it, but maybe 6 months from now, a patch comes out that we can fix that problem on our system. There are certainly design questions that should be asked when setting up any sort of IT system. We all know that, but especially in communications. So what are some of those questions? Certainly capacity. What do we expect as far as the number of calls that we need to be able to handle? What do we expect in terms of if a disaster happens, how many calls do we need to be able to handle outgoing or incoming? That's certainly probably going to be different than if we're at 100%, everything's humming along fine. We may be able to handle, let's say, 800 or 100 calls at a time. But if we have a disaster, maybe we only expect to be able to handle 50. I don't know. That's a business decision that needs to be made. What sort of interfaces do we have on the system? Certainly, if you have VoIP-only systems, it becomes much easier to deal with disasters and recover from them because then it becomes a matter of software and redirecting traffic. If we have PRIs or analog interfaces that we need to worry about, the scenario becomes a little bit more difficult, and we need to plan more carefully, perhaps, than we would with a VoIP-only system. Are we dealing with situations where we need lifelines? So do we have systems in a doctor's office, for instance? If the power goes out, the doctor's office may need to close down and evacuate people out of there. But in the meantime, they should have dial tones so that they can make a 911 call if somebody has an emergency, right? What do our remote sites look like? What sort of security are they using to get into our system? Is it VPN? Do we have access control lists? Those are all things that need to be part of the disaster recovery plan, certainly. And then, like I said, what is our acceptable behavior during a disaster? That's going to drive a lot of the design. There was an incident I'm from Pennsylvania, and there was an incident in Pennsylvania back a few months ago. I think it was 5 or 6 months ago now, that I put in this talk because I thought it was a good example of an atypical disaster. So we all think about the typical things. We lose power to our building, or our ITSP goes down, so we have a redundant ITSP. I think it's important that your documents for disaster recovery and your planning and your practicing look at the atypical things and not scoff at things that look like they may be outliers and they'll never happen. So this is an atypical disaster. You can see this bridge looks like it's on fire in Pennsylvania, and this is actually in our state capital, Harrisburg. And you can see this is Route 81 here at the bottom of the screen. And then this is 322, and then there's another route, I can't remember what route that is, that runs over top of it. But basically what happened in this scenario, a truck was going around the bridge, the turn, and there was a turn that wasn't quite banked correctly. And there also happened to be a little bit of a bump when you hit it, it went up. And a fuel truck went around that turn, hit it too fast, hit the bump, ended up tipping over and caught on fire. That shut down our entire interstate system in that area and snarled traffic for weeks until they figured out how to reroute people and come up with alternate ways to get people around. I kind of doubt that this scenario was part of their original disaster recovery plan. I hope that it is now. And I think this all gets back to learning from the atypical things and what's actually happening in the real world. This probably was something that nobody ever really envisioned. I'm going to touch on this slide really, really quickly. This is actually from my AstraCon talk last year. The AstraCon talk last year, to give you a little bit of an overview, talked about using commodity hardware and software and internet service in order to build a reliable telecommunications infrastructure. And so in this case, we are using DRBD along with Linux KVM virtualization to basically mirror PBX configurations and PBX servers. And we're using VIATA routers up at the top there to connect all the remote systems back into the data center. And then we're using some failover between our ITSPs that are used for outgoing and incoming calling. So if we lose a telephone provider, we can still service telephone calls. So again, going into the design questions, what sorts of things should we be asking ourselves? Is it going to be an automatic or manual failover? Certainly, do eliminated risks justify the increased investment in hardware or software resources, whatever that may be? And then I think also, looking at the providers, I I don't want to call them out by name, but there was a provider in New York City. Did anybody use that provider that was hit during the storm that came through? So you know who I'm talking about. This provider was fairly well known in the industry. I think a lot of us trusted the provider. I know I trusted them fairly well. We used them as a backup for telephone calls. We had seen some slight hiccups in the past, so we didn't use it as our primary ITSP. But whenever the storm came through, Hurricane Sandy, people found out that their generators were below street level. So they got flood water. They couldn't run the generators. Then we were hearing stories on Twitter about people passing buckets of diesel fuel up 12 flights or 8 flights of stairs, something like that, in order to get to the generators that were now on the roof that they had brought in temporarily. And they had just come off of a DOS attack, probably, 2 weeks before that, something like that. It was a very short period of time. But not to put that provider down, but I think that there were a lot of lessons learned through that event. And there were a lot of people that probably looked at their systems then and said, we're relying on one provider to do all of these, provide all of these services for us, and we now have a hole that we need to patch up because this provider is no longer available. And certainly, are we looking at systems that need to last for 20 or 10 or 5 years? Are we doing gradual or rip and replace sort of scenarios? And keep questioning and reviewing and adjusting. So I'm going to kind of flip through these slides here because I want to get to some of the actual tools. Certainly VoIP can, VoIP outstrips traditional telecom because we can deliver and fail calls anywhere with quality internet access. It's agnostic. We don't really care about the device or the provider that we're sending it to, and it's agile. It allows us to change in a matter of minutes versus hours or days. Again, call clarity, scalability up and down. These are all things that we can do very rapidly with voice over IP. This is something I'll point out here as far as disaster recovery and business continuity goes. With Asterisk and VoIP, we certainly have a lot more data in real time than we did in the past. So with CDRs, so in the past we had to, we might have had to wait for the telephone company to send us the bill before we could see what was going on. Now we have real-time CDRs. On the previous slide, I had a link there, and I'll just touch on Edgewater Networks. Has a really slick session border controller, which will allow you to convert from T1 PRI to VoIP, either incoming or outgoing, whichever way you want to do it. And those boxes, by default, spit out MOS scores. So a MOS score is a mean opinion score, which tells you something about the quality of the phone call that has happened on that device. And a MOS score has something like 20 or 22 different scores that are aggregated, and then you come up with a MOS score. If you aren't doing any monitoring today and you're having trouble with call quality and clarity sorts of things, the Edgewater device is a really nice device to look at because it will spit out a MOS score, so you can see an alert on if your MOS score drops below, let's say, a 4.0. You can start to see where those calls were going to or coming from and identify, is it you, is it the provider, is it the end person that you're talking to? It helps you to track those things down. Another really cool device, and we're starting to get into just kind of examples of things that are out on the market. We use the Viata open source router. Really, really slick. Does anybody use Viata in the room? Nobody? Okay. Viata is really cool. It's an ISO download. You can download it to a CD, or you can download it as a VM. And it's basically a software-based router. If Cisco can do it, Viata can do it. They have a free version, and then they have a paid support version, which also includes high availability. And in the slide going back to the beginning that I showed of an example with all the different remote sites that VPN into the data center, we actually use Viata on white box Foxconn PCs, and those cost us like $150 a piece to deploy them. It's very, very similar command line interface to Cisco. So if you're familiar with Cisco at all, it's very easy to adapt. They do have a graphical user interface, which is web-based. I don't use it. It's a little bit limited. And it's probably, to be honest, the GUI is probably just as confusing as the CLI is if you're not familiar with it. So I'm not really sure how much the GUI adds to that. Somebody at the last AstraCon mentioned Squeeze and Gluster as good alternatives to Viata. I don't have personal experience with them, but I did want to include them in the slide. Patent Electronics has a line of really cool units that they call the Bodhi units, and this is what's shown in the picture here. This is actually showing 3 different Bodhi units. This guy here on the top is the Bodhi 1000. It can basically sync to another Bodhi, and you can have your connections coming in. If one Bodhi dies, everything can fail over to the secondary one. And what these devices all allow you to do is run in any number of commodity or service level agreement bandwidth and define rules. So you could say maybe port 1 is a Comcast internet connection, and I want to send all my web traffic over that. And port 2 is my DSL connection, and I want to send voice traffic over that because it's not shared bandwidth and the latency doesn't go up and down so much. And then they have USB ports that you can plug in a 3G or a 4G modem, and you can tell it only transmit 4 gigs of traffic because that's what my plan allows, and then fail over to the next provider in the list. Really, really slick devices. Out of the box, they're fairly inexpensive devices. If you need something to be able to bond multiple providers together, I would encourage you to look at those guys. That unit on the bottom right is a in-car unit, and it runs on DC power. So you could actually have this in a police car or whatever your application was for mobile. Certainly, Digium has their R series chassis. That's what's shown in this picture here. And you could have analog or digital coming into this device. Do we have about 5-10 minutes left? Is that? Okay. Okay. Zorcom has a similar unit. So basically what this allows you to do, this Digium unit, is run in a bunch of analog lines into this device. The R series chassis connects over USB to 2 phone servers. So this is your primary, that's your standby. There is a private LAN that's operating on the back end between those 2 boxes. And this heartbeat detects a failure of the box. So if this box fails, this R series chassis will switch all of these analog lines over to that server. Zorcom has similar solutions that work over USB. I think that there are other providers out there that have similar solutions as well. Really, really slick things if you need to be able to fail over analog lines or PRI lines between servers. I already touched a little bit on virtualization. We use this in production for a lodging company, and that's the slide going back that had the example infrastructure. So this is showing a little bit of an example of KVM in particular. It's actually keeping track of block information on a hard drive and writing it from our primary box to our standby box as it happens. So if the primary goes down, and that has happened before, those boxes are just Dell PowerEdge servers. We've had once or twice where they core dump, and it's basically a RAID 1. So everything's already mirrored on that box, everything just keeps ticking along. Everybody's voicemail is there and all the logs and all those things on that box. So that's all at your kind of premise level. At the provider level, some providers, and I picked out Vitality for this screenshot. We use Vitality fairly extensively. Vitality actually provides a way in their control panel to fail over services. So in this example, we have a couple DIDs, phone numbers here. This is telling us what our rate center is. It's routing via SIP, and it's normally pointed at this IP address. Since I took this screenshot, Vitality now has the capability with SIP to fail over between SIP servers. In this particular instance, the screenshot's a little bit old, so we were just, the plan for this particular account was to fail the DIDs over to cell phones. So you can see here, there's just everybody's cell phone number programmed into the failover there. So if Vitality tries to route a call to your server and it's not up, it just fails the call over to that number. And then that number handles the voicemail and whatever from there. So these are all things that are, this is like available stuff that's free to use. It doesn't cost you anything extra to do this. Certainly there's a lot of documentation and tools, and I would encourage you to lean on the work of what's already been done and what's good and existing out there. Again, to give a shout out to Vitality, they have an application programming interface now. Their help is online at this website, and that allows you to programmatically do things like failover between servers. It allows you to look up telephone numbers in their DID database and see if they're available, et cetera. But in terms of disaster recovery and business continuity, there's a whole set of functions within Vitality's API that you can reroute calls programmatically if you need to. The federal government and the Department of Defense have put a good amount of work into making sure that systems are available and reliable, obviously. And one of the ways that they try to ensure this and make sure that systems are not being hacked is through the STIGs. And STIG is a Security Technical Implementation Guide. The government loves their acronyms. And the STIGs cover everything from databases like MySQL and Oracle and Microsoft SQL to Android devices, iPads, anything and everything that you can think of. Basically, if the federal government or the military adopts the technology, the STIG team brings that technology in, decomposes it, and says, we recommend that these ports be turned off, these file permissions be changed, don't allow root access, yada, yada. And you can download those STIGs, the unclassified portions of them, at that website address there. There are also mailing lists for the STIGs. So if you have, let's say, a lot of Red Hat Enterprise Linux servers out in the field, you can sign up for the Red Hat Enterprise Linux STIG, and you'll get an email when that STIG is updated, letting you know that there's a new version available. Asterisk 12, we're all hearing all the buzz and great things that are happening in Asterisk 12. I think the most exciting thing, if you go and talk to Matt Jordan or anybody on the development team, is the REST API. There is great documentation at wiki.asterisk.org. I didn't realize this, but Billy Chia was telling me at lunch that the documentation for wiki.asterisk.org is actually pulled out of the source code. So as the source is updated, that website is now being updated. And source code is only going into the root trunk if it has good documentation. So this is really, really good stuff for the community. REST API is going to allow you to see way more information than you were able to see with AGI or AMI in the past. And I think in the next couple of years, we're going to see some really cool disaster recovery management tools and alerting tools come out of an interface with REST API. Going back to Ole's suggestion or challenge to the community that we all be using IPv6 and DNSSEC, he just told me this morning about the Internet Society has a program that they call Deploy 360. And I didn't put the web address in here because it's a little bit long, but I think it's internetsociety.org/deploy360. And there is a good deal of documentation there about how do you deploy IPv6 in your organization in DNSSEC and get these things running and test them. So if you're interested in that, definitely go find that website. So before we wrap up, does anybody have any questions? I've thrown a lot of hypotheticals and technology terms around the room. Has anybody learned anything? Is everybody sleeping? Okay, well, just to wrap up, definitely remember security, lean on the work that's already been done. If you're interested in last year's talk, it's available at this tiny URL address. Trixbox, I believe, is basically dead at this point, but Kerry Garrison did a great job in describing some of the business design ideas that you should be thinking about whenever you are putting together a PBX. I would encourage you to check that book out. Of course, Asterisk, the definitive guide. If anybody has any questions or wants to get in contact with me, my contact information is here on the screen, and here are some of the resources that I talked about today and where you can access things. So thank you all for coming.